Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me? We have new, longer mics, so I want to make sure you all can, before we'd have to hold it up right to our mouths. Hopefully this one works a little bit better. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight to hear about the downtown. Hopefully I'm not too boring in this presentation, but I see a baby here, so maybe I'll help you all making him fall asleep tonight. To bed at a good time, but hopefully this is an interesting presentation. I was asked to come here by the governing body. This is the fourth and final town hall to inform the community about a big project that's upcoming, but also to recap some things that have been done since 2019 when we last did our series of downtown development discussions, if you were able to attend that. I'm going to go over some rehash slides from that period as well. But we do have some governing body members with us here this evening. We have Mayor Jeanette Rochelle in the back over there, Vice Mayor Mensing, and then Councilmember Moore. And I believe that is it for governing body members. So my name is City Manager Laszlo Palko. I work for the governing body and serve you all. So tonight, and I have this laser pointer here as well to kind of guide you through things. I want to start off by first letting you all know that we did do a rebranding effort over the last few years as well to name our downtown and to come up with a logo as well. The name for that we came up with for the downtown is Park Central to represent the center part of Manassas Park. And we came up with a logo, the tree logo that has multiple colors to represent our diversity, but also the three parts of our city, the west, east, and center, all coming together in one. And we're going with Virginia's newest downtown because once we're done by hopefully 2025, if not 2026, we'll be the newest downtown in all Virginia. We'll go with that for a few years before we pivot to a different message. So tonight, the main goals are twofold. I want to give you an update on where we're at with the downtown development. And then secondly, to talk about supportive developments for the downtown. So not directly in the downtown, but they're projects that either help us accomplish our downtown goals or they help us to fund public facilities, which is always a goal as well of the downtown development that I'll show you here. We have another council member joining us, Councilmember Maya. As well. So these are the two goals for this evening, and this meeting tonight is actually being recorded. Forgot to mention that on YouTube. We're going to upload this full slide deck after tonight's presentation because I wanted to post it once the YouTube video is up so people can hear the full presentation and get the full context for why you see things on the slides that you'll see. So I always start off with a math equation because that's what this is. Everything that you do, every decision that you make as a government or as a business is always going to come down to math, right? Revenues and expenses and making sure that they balance. So you may be upset with a certain tax rate, right? You want that tax rate to come down. Something else has to give, right? You got to either increase your tax base, right? So you can reduce the rate, or you got to reduce spending on the other side in order to be able to do that. Or you may say, hey, we need to pay our employees more. I demand more services from our schools, from better streets, whatever it is that you're demanding, code enforcement and parking enforcement. We've heard a lot of that over the last few years. The more services you want, right, the price goes up on the right. That impacts your revenues on the left. So everything we talk about tonight comes back down to this math formula. It has to work out mathematically, right? For both a development standpoint, right? The numbers have to work for the development to work, and also from a public policy standpoint, there's constant trade-offs that have to be made, but at the end of the day, the formula has to work. And what we've been facing as a city is, as you all know, the highest tax rate in Virginia. That we know that's the #1 priority for residents is to get that tax rate down. Simply because we have the highest tax rate doesn't mean we actually have the most money. We actually have the least amount of money in all Northern Virginia as a share of per capita. That's because our tax base is the weakest. And what I like to remind everyone is back when I did this town hall in 2019 where we first started talking about the downtown, what we were doing, when you compared the schools funding, right, the state provides funding for municipalities based off your ability to pay. And at that time, Falls Church was receiving roughly $4 million from the state, whereas the city was receiving roughly $28 million from the state. And the reason for that is the state determined that Manassas Park just was unable to pay fully the school system because of the weak tax base. Right, nothing to do with the formula on the right, but everything to do with the tax base. They look at your tax base, they look at your population, they look at multiple factors and determine that Manassas Park itself could not fully fund its schools without more help from the state, right? That just kind of reaffirms the problem that we had is that weak tax base that needs to grow in order to be able to reduce that tax rate to fund those other items. We also had and continue to have the lowest pay, unfortunately, for for our employees. We know that's not always a popular issue with residents, government employee pay, but we compete in a marketplace, right? So the Falls Churches of the world, the Prince William counties, the Fairfax counties, right? They steal our employees. They'll offer more money for our employees. In order for us to retain employees, to provide quality services, this includes teachers, police officers, firefighters, we have to have competitive pay. Right? And so I've begged all the larger jurisdictions to come together and stop stealing each other's employees, stop this race to the bottom where salaries are just skyrocketing across the region with no control. But the Fairfax counties of the world, the Loudoun counties of the world, they know they can outcompete the smaller jurisdictions, so they keep that going. And so we're always going to be lagging behind, but we try to stay as close as possible to minimize the impact so that employees do consider staying here because of the quality of working in this organization compared to working for others. But that's an ongoing issue. We remain the lowest full-time equivalent staffing level in all Northern Virginia as well. One of the slide decks that you have there on the back will show that. So what you have in front of you is different from this. It has some extra slides that are not on here and some of the slides that are on here, but you'll get this full presentation posted on the website afterwards as well. But we have the lowest FTEs, right, full-time equivalents, the lowest pay. We've deferred a lot of capital, unfortunately, over the last few years in order to balance our budget. And that comes to bite you back in the future, right? Because as you defer capital and infrastructure investments, the prices only go up in the future. But we had to do that to balance our budget, to achieve budget surpluses, to fix the next category, which is reserves, which we had a very weak position before. We're strengthening that position as well. But you can see those three expenditure points are incredibly low from a city compared to all other jurisdictions, and that's what we need to try to get back up. What was incredibly high from an expenditure standpoint was debt. So we can argue we don't have a spending problem when it comes to those three issues, staffing, capital, and reserves, but we did have a spending problem when it came to debt, right? We financed a lot of things in the 2000s that we're paying for today, right? The 4 school facilities, the police station, the fire station, the community center was all debt issued in the 2000s that we had to figure out how to pay for in 2019 when the debt balloon finally spiked, and we took that head on to deal with that while balancing the budget, starting to achieve surpluses, and we've done a lot of refinancing to try to bring down that debt burden on you all for paying back that debt. So the goal of the city is to improve our tax base, continue to improve our collection rate, which was not good a few years ago, but which has balanced out so far. We've gotten close to either 99% collection rates or even 100% collection rates for certain items. Others are still low at 97%. But when I first got here, we were in the high 80s for collection rates. So we weren't collecting a lot of money back then. So we balance that out now, but we still need to get that tax base up, and we still need to get that debt down to a level that's sustainable, that's competitive with other jurisdictions. One of the slides you have in the back as well just shows what we looked like back in 2018 and what we look like now in terms of debt, as a comparison with our benchmark sister cities of Falls Church, Manassas, Fairfax City, and we even threw in Fredericksburg, which is another Northern Virginia locality, and how much we've gotten that debt burden down for residents over the last few years. So at home, feel free to take a look at that as well. But that's what's going on here. That's our strategy so that we can do tax rate reductions as a #1 priority, increasing pay and FTEs, investments in our capital infrastructure, making sure we're investing enough in our roads, enough in our facility maintenance. All those buildings we built in the 2000s have to be maintained. They have to be renovated constantly as they age. They're almost going to be 30 years now, some of them. Our high school, I believe, was completed in 1999, so by 2029, you're talking about a 30-year-old building. It's going to have some major renovations that are going to be needed. So we're being responsible and saving money for that future and building debt capacity as well when that happens. Building up reserves for our creditors. Our city now is up to a AA credit rating, and I'll show you kind of where we were before. And before we did do a lot of debt refinancing, we're continuing to stay disciplined on debt, not incurring new debt in order to let that debt liability go down. But tonight, I'm focused primarily on the tax base. How do we improve this tax base? So in 2017, this is where we were. The state was going to intervene. They were going to declare us fiscally distressed. spent some dollars to get people up here to help us fix the mess, right, to plan to properly financially manage the city. We were able to talk them out of that and to give us a chance to turn things around. We were unauditable, so we were about 3 years behind, or 2 years behind, but it took us 3 years to finally get there, to be able to complete audits. We were below junk bond credit ratings. We had no credit at all. No one was willing to loan to us except for our local bank, who did loan money to us in order to pay our payroll and accounts payable, because we had a cash problem too back then. We had a ballooning debt that we talked about, the 2019 debt spike, where debt consumed 25% of our total budget. So we were spending more on debt than we were contributing to schools. We were spending more on debt on that time that we were spending net for all 5 of our major line departments: police, fire, public works, Parks and Rec, and social services. Net of the revenue they bring in, we were spending more on debt than all of those agencies combined. That's how much of a debt burden that we had back then. Our budgets weren't accurate. We had structural deficits, so each year we were losing $1 million about over the few years prior to that. We had the failed downtown across the street, which is what I'm going to talk about tonight, right? And we were in a negative $1 million financial position. What that means is that if we paid all of our bills and we collected every revenue that was owed to us, our bank account would say negative $1 million, right? So we were beyond broke at that time. This is where we are now. We've turned things around. We've had great leadership since 2016 with Mayor Rochelle and the members who were elected back then to turn things around, and that's what they did. We're up now to a AA credit rating, so we caught the federal government, so that's exciting. We refinanced a lot of debt. Millions of dollars of debt was refinanced at that time to bring that burden down. We've achieved structural budget surpluses now every year, so we can put money aside into reserves, which helped us build that positive $10 million position now that we have from a fund balance, which is why, again, our credit rating skyrocketed in the last few years. Low unemployment since post-COVID, strengthening tax base. It has been growing. If you once I post this full slide deck, you'll see some of the backup slides. It shows how we've been growing from a tax base, from a meals tax, sales tax, business license tax. We've outpaced all of our sister jurisdictions except for Falls Church with meals taxes. But for every other category, we're going faster than the other jurisdictions. And we're in the process of developing a new downtown, but we're not even close to being done. I'd say we're about a quarter done, right? So I'm going to go over what we've done so far and what's still left. We've been committed to cutting tax rates. Back when we were dealing with the debt balloon, we couldn't cut taxes. We couldn't give our employees any pay raises that year. We had to keep capital pretty much at zero for a lot of departments. We had to do 5% across the board departmental cuts that year as well. But nevertheless, we said, okay, we know that we're going to tackle this debt burden eventually, and we want to start reducing that tax rate. So the red line up there signifies what our plan was back then. How are we going to cut taxes, right? We knew that by FY23, we were going to have a decrease in our debt liability. And that did happen, and we put 100% of that decrease in debt back into tax rate reductions. The blue line represents what actually happened, right? So the governing body has cut tax rates much more significantly than what we planned to do back then, what was acceptable for our creditors, because that was kind of a gradual tax rate decline. Even with the more robust one, though, our creditors are still confident, and they just recently bumped us up from single A to double A, despite that, because of our stronger financial position. So what this represents is a tax savings of about $3 million above and beyond what we were planning back then, money back to you all. Now, overall, your bills continue to go up because assessed values go up, right? But what we did this year, we know we have inflation, right, across the economy. So last year's inflation was about 6.5%. We only allowed revenues to grow 6% this year, so we stayed under inflation, right? For your bills to start coming down, right, we need growth. We need tax-based growth so your tax bill can come down. We control the tax rate. What we don't control is the assessed value of your property, right? That's the market, right? That's demand and supply for housing that we'll get to in the next few slides here. But we have stayed true and gone further beyond what was promised before in terms of tax rate reductions, and that's what that blue line represents. And there's a potential to do more, again, with more development. We don't just exist as a city governmental entity, we also have a few enterprises, and we have to keep watch on those, and that's why reserves is so important as well, because all of these have to be structurally healthy. Unfortunately, the solid waste fund, we inherited it in negative position. We've been decreasing that negative balance to try to get to a positive, but what we have seen with solid waste as well is just skyrocketing costs. Just like everyone has seen with inflation, the cost of solid waste collection has dramatically spiked. We don't want to take it out with bigger rate increases than we need, so we try to stabilize that and be patient with getting that liability down. So essentially the general fund right now is subsidizing the solid waste fund rates to be below than what they actually should be. Stormwater, this is an EPA mandated fund for us to deal with the quality of stormwater. There's certain projects we have to do. We know that the fund balance we've been building for that is going to be spent down, but we are looking for grants. We are looking for congressional directed spending in order to help bring that liability down for you all as well. And then our water and sewer fund was the healthiest, and it is, but we're planning on spending that money that we had saved for that for necessary capital infrastructure improvements, because it's a very outdated system, especially on the west side of the city. There's a lot of infrastructure needs that they have over there. We want to finance or get those funded, and we know we can afford to do that without steep rate increases because of the fund balance we have and because the debt burden for the water and sewer fund also starts to decrease towards the latter part of this decade, so the fund balance can get healthy at that time. But we keep a close watch on all this and focus on our entire city position of keeping it healthy, so we remain in a strong financial position, have a strong credit rating, and a strong financial future to tackle those problems that we're going to face in the 2030s as our facilities start to age. So I'm not going to go over all these, but these are just kind of examples of things we've done to fix the finances. The one that I've been highlighting, which is very creative, was both the Blooms Park project and the library project. And I highlight this because I encourage people to go to both of them, right? So for Blooms Park, that was in the county before. It was a golf course. The county wanted to get out of that. They paid us $500,000, and we were able to boundary line adjust the park into our city limits along with Signal Hill Park, and we got $500,000 out of that. And I hope you all have hiked that park. Has anyone hiked that park here? Very beautiful, right? So it was a very popular amenity for our residents. It came perfect time with COVID-19. And then our library, we also pulled out of the Prince William County library system. That yielded about a $500,000 savings over 2 years. And now we have this wonderful library here in the downtown for you all to enjoy. So we're spending less than we were spending with the county, and you have your own product now here for residents to enjoy. But those are just examples of what we've done. But we have achieved financial stability. We have our completed audits. We have award-winning audits now, and you'll hear that tomorrow night at the governing bodies meeting. And again, no declaration of fiscal distress. We're going in the opposite direction, but we have to stay disciplined in order to not fall back, because if we can fall back like this, if we don't watch out, if we start making bad decisions here, we can fall back into that position where we used to be. All right, so economic development, of course, is going to be the best way to ensure that we don't fall back and that we go from just sustainable to also strength, right? Because financial strength is what's going to enable your tax rates to go down even further. It's going to enable us to fund all those capital liabilities that we have and to stay competitive with the region so they're not stealing all of our employees and impacting our ability to provide quality services to you all. So this is a reminder slide from 2019, the town hall that we talked about then. And what I want to highlight here is that everything we're talking about tonight, we didn't just pull out of a hat, right? We had analytics, we had different reports kind of discussing what needed to be done for us to be successful here, right? And what they told us was that we have a market capacity of supply under demand of about 100,000 square feet of commercial space, right? Of traditional retail space. That doesn't include things like banks or movie theaters, but it does include traditional retailers and restaurants. 100,000, that's the limit of what we have to build, and that's what we're basing our numbers off of for development right now. We're not being overly aggressive beyond that because we want to stay within market realities. That was a conservative estimate, though, and I'll show you what that looked at and what it didn't look at. So we have potential to do more than that, but we're staying conservative with what we're actually building out. The other thing you highlighted, of course, is that we need adjacent and sufficient parking. If you look across the street, there's no parking for those retail spaces, and what do all retailers and restaurants need? Customers. What do customers need? The ability to get to an establishment, and that's what the developments that I'm going to talk about tonight, that's what we're working on. The best type of parking for a restaurant or a retail establishment is one right in front of their establishment. where you pull right in front and you get out of your car and go in. That's what they all want, right? Across the street, you're not going to be able to do that for the most part. There's a small reform that we're going to do to potentially yield that, but for the most part, the second best is adjacent parking, where you can just park, get out of your car, then walk to the center adjacent, or if it's going to be behind the business, it better be really close so you can quickly access it, right? But we don't have that right now, and that's what we're working on getting. The other thing that was identified that we needed was an anchor, a commercial anchor, something that brings people to the town center to make it successful. And I'm going to talk about town centers tonight because that's one of our opportunities that we have, and we need to model ourselves off of other town centers and how they've done it successfully as well to ensure that our town center becomes successful. The other thing it pointed out was that the ideals of the city that we had back then, that we only wanted about 40% residential as a share of the total build out, right? So we wanted 60% commercial versus 40% residential. That was a pipe dream. It was never going to happen. You were never going to have developers actually build that out. And there's two important reasons why residential development is needed for any development, right? Number one is rooftops. You need people, right? Restaurants and retailers need people. So the more density and rooftops you provide, the more likely that those businesses will be successful. But more importantly than that, for an actual development itself, the residential subsidizes the commercial. That's just how it is. Residential vacancy rates barely exist in this region because you have about 100,000 unit shortage of housing in Northern Virginia than you have compared to demand, right? So that means that's why your assessments are going up. That's why across the region, home values keep going up. Despite 7% mortgage rates right now, people are still paying paying high prices for housing right now. For that reason, demand continues to outpace supply. So for a developer, it's less risky to build residential right now because they know they're going to sell it or it's going to be full. Retail vacancies averaging around 20%. That's more high risk, right? Office is pretty much dead post-COVID. You're not building a lot of new office. The only office where it's kind of still successful is around modern town centers, right? That's the only place you're seeing a little bit of movement of office. For the most part, office is dead right now in the traditional downtowns of larger cities because of COVID-19. But that was a trend even before, where businesses were looking to downsize by about 20 to 40% of office space to become more efficient. So residential, that's why residential is needed, right? So in this development that you're seeing right now, this city hall and all the infrastructure for the commercial that happened is being paid for by those houses that you're seeing built back here. That's just how the market works. Another reminder of a 2019 slide, we don't, again, just wake up and say, hey, we want to do development for development's sake, right? We establish what our goals are before we go out there and say, what are we looking to do, right? We set out goals first, and then we look for partners to help us achieve our objectives. That's a smart way to do development. What did I talk about first? Parking, right? This is the original phase one, what used to be called City Center, what's now called Park 170, right across the street with the empty storefronts, right? They don't have the parking. One development that was just rezoned about a month ago is going to give them some parking. Really to help out this side, in the long run, we're going to have to look at what we're doing on this side as well to help out these businesses over here. But I'm hopeful with the anchor, we're going to have enough pool here so that that side will also be successful. But at this moment, what we have planned is the parking on this side at least, clearing out some of these old industrial buildings for a new development to provide the parking for phase one, which again was an identified need. Number two, we needed an anchor, right? That's what we're getting here on the phase 3 development, which was rezoned a couple years ago, which is currently under construction. That's what you see outside being developed right now, right? What's that commercial anchor? That's the primary objective of what I'm going to talk about tonight is the movie theater, right? Why movie theater? What's happening in the theater industry? Because we heard a lot since COVID-19 and inflation, right? About what's happening with the theater industry. What are we doing, right? There's a lot of bad things that have happened over the last few years. We had our plan in place, we had our deal in place, and then COVID hit us. And then inflation hit us, right? It can't be an excuse for us. We have to problem solve and think about how to overcome those challenges. And that's what we're doing tonight. The garage. The garage was supposed to be placed back here. This development enabled us to push it over here, much closer to the Four Corners area that our consultants recommended putting your primary commercial spaces here. It has to be right next to that. And this development allowed us to do that. If it was back here, it would have been too far. And this development wouldn't have worked. So the phase 3 helped us achieve that objective. City Hall, this right here, this building used to be the City Hall. And that building is very old, built in the 1980s as a pesticide facility. The city was smart to buy it back then. It achieved its objectives of providing a City Hall space for 30 years, right? But that building was beyond its lifetime. And if we need to do renovations for that building, that would have come back on taxpayers for how to renovate that building. That's not what we wanted to do, right? We wanted a new building that would have a new life cycle established, and we wanted a development to pay for it, right? So you wouldn't pay a single dime for this building, and you haven't. I'll show you that. You haven't paid anything for this building. It's all been paid for by the development back there. And then the additional retail in the four corners, the spaces that you have below the city hall and adjacent, right, and then on the other side of what we're going to show tonight. So those were our goals that we worked out, and we're still working towards those goals, but we have a lot of work to do still and a lot to overcome with COVID and inflation. So what are our challenges and what are our opportunities? So I don't discuss this when I meet with businesses or developers to entice them to come to our city, but I'm going to always be honest with the governing body. I'm going to be always honest with residents. The biggest challenge that we have from a commercial development standpoint is this is Route 66 and this is us. We're too far from Route 66. Every other municipality in Northern Virginia has access to either 66, 95, the tollway, or they have long stretches of major roads, right? Prince William Parkway, or Route 50, Route 29. Look at how Falls Church is shaped, and Route 7 pretty much goes through all along Falls Church. That's tremendous potential for commercial. We lack that. That is our competitive disadvantage. Even the little section of Route 28 that we have, look how tiny it is. It's nothing. Compare that, look at the map of Fairfax City, Falls Church, look at even Dumfries right off of 95, a major interstate that goes from the northeast down to Miami, right? All these other municipalities have that, we don't. That's our challenge that we have to overcome. So we always have to be realistic in what we can accomplish. We have to be aggressive, how we market ourselves to the outside world, and we have to highlight the opportunities that we have, our strengths. And the two major strengths that we have, the two opportunities that we have, is we do have the Virginia Rail Express right next door, the station here. We're about to get that garage. That was funded via grants because the VRE wanted to build a garage here because they have their plan for 2030. By 2030, they're going to have reverse commute from DC once the Long Bridge project is done, which they're working on now, evening services and weekend services. And the beautiful part of this VRE station is that it's the last station servicing this region until you get to about Burke. That's why the garage is being built. That's our opportunity. That's our strength that we have to take advantage. That garage is the only reason why a theater is even talking to us, because that's free parking for them. That's what they need, right? And when the VRE is less busy is when they're most busy, weekends and evenings. So they get to take advantage of all that parking. The other opportunity that we have is that there's no modern town centers within 25 minutes of Park Central, and I'll show you that on the next slide. Those are our competitors, right? We have two things in our region right now in this local market. We have a lot of strip development, Liberia Avenue, Sudley, right? You can even argue a little bit of 28, but 28 is a challenge, right, to get on and off. That's why Sudley and Liberia do much better than 28, even though 28 has about 15,000 more cars on a daily basis than Liberia Avenue does. Liberia is still kicking their butt, right? Because it was designed properly to allow for customers to get on and off a lot easier. That strip development involves your car, right? It's not a walkable modern town center. I'll show you what those are on the next slide. But we also have our old towns, right? We have Old Town Manassas. That's a different product type, right? If you look at other parts of Northern Virginia, right? You have, Old Town Fairfax, Old Town Alexandria, Old Town Leesburg. Those have modern town centers pretty close to them. And they're not kind of devouring each other. They're supportive of each other. That's why we have this opportunity. And here's our competitors, if you will. Oh, sorry, I went too fast there. So you have Virginia Gateway in Gainesville, Stonebridge down in Woodbridge, which was actually just bought by a developer, and you have Fairfax Corner, right, again, close to Old Town Fairfax as well. And further up, you have Village at Leesburg, that's right next to Old Town Leesburg. You have other town centers like Mosaic here, but these are our immediate competitors, and you can see in this market, we're not served by a modern town center, and I'll show you another opportunity in the next slide for why we have that opportunity to be that first modern town center in that area. If you look at all these, they're all anchored by a movie theater. You can argue that Stonebridge is also anchored by a Wegmans. That's a huge help, but they also have an Alamo Draft House there as well, right? All these walkable town centers have a garage, right, or enough parking, and then a theater, right? That's what kind of anchors, usually a plaza as well, usually a splash pad. You see what we're doing out here, right? Those are kind of the common themes that bring people to that place to congregate, to get food, to get drinks, and to bring families together. And those are competitors. I was worried a few years ago that near the George Mason campus, they were going to get an Alamo Draft House. They were going to do a lot of other commercial. That's still out of this area, but it's still very close. That was worrying me that I was going to take our market share away. But this is our market opportunity. The other reason why it's our market opportunity, if you see these stars right over here, this is a Cinemark up in Centerville. Not the nicest theater, if anyone's been there, right? But they do pretty well. About 350,000 people per year. Regal, on the other side of 66, also about 300,000 people per year. That Regal's going away. It's being rezoned for residential because what I talked about before, right? The power of residential versus commercial. That's an opportunity for us, for this market, to capture that for our theater. Right? And we want to go with a unique theater that's going to bring a lot more people to this downtown with a diverse array of products. Remember I talked to you about that 100,000 square feet of commercial potential? That was just looking at this blue area and a little bit of this red over here. It did not take into account all of this. So we're still going to be conservative in what we build, but we want to ensure that these businesses that come here are going to be successful by us tapping into these markets. And we know we can tap into these markets because we have existing infrastructure that already does, right? The VRE before COVID-19 was tapping into this exact market. Central Library was tapping into this exact market, and we've now brought the library in here. The community center across on the west side is pulling from this market as well, right? We know the kind of the traffic patterns that people will come down here if there's a reason for it. We want to give them the best reason for that, which is entertainment experience as well, not just for commuting purposes or the library. But that's why having the library here was also important. A new modern library that can compete with other libraries and bring people to this area as well. And this was a snapshot, I believe, shown to the governing body back in December. Our new library opened up in September, and these red dots kind of represent all the different areas that people were coming from for our library. And you can see kind of those market areas that I highlighted, kind of the density of where people are coming from this library. Between the library and our rec center, they're pulling about 250,000 people per year, visitors for both facilities, right, combined. So when the movie theater tells me, hey, we can pull 400,000, I believe them. Because more people are going to go to a movie theater. It's much bigger, right? There's a lot more there. And the movie theater I'm talking about is just not a movie theater, right? They're going to have bowling, they're going to have arcades, and you'll see kind of what the other items that they're going to have to be kind of a full family entertainment area for our families. So this is the downtown, and like I said, we're not close to being done, right? We know this was already developed in the past, and we're trying to fix those issues. These two buildings were also developed. This is a 7-story apartment building, and this is a 2-story office building which houses a Montessori school on the lower level and a Department of Social Services on the second level. This is yet to be developed. But just a side note, this 8 acres here, the city used to own, and unfortunately in 2013 it sold it for about $340,000. Okay, what we're selling land for now per acre in the downtown is roughly $1.5 million. Okay, the city did not do a good job when it came to that development, and plus, we didn't have the parking for this, right? They could have made this parking for the commercial and this parking for the residential. They didn't do that. So again, we inherited a lot of issues, and we don't use those as excuses. We come up with solutions for how to overcome those negative factors that we inherited, okay? This is what's been rezoned. 2 10-story apartments to fund the acquisition of these industrial properties, because it's expensive to buy, right? For the developer to be able to buy that and develop and build 150 spaces that doesn't even benefit them, this was the only way to do it, right? And it was very challenging to find someone who could actually pull it off, who can make the deals, right? Because you can't condemn property for residential. That just doesn't happen. So there has to be a private sector transaction, and that's how we got phase 4. To this point, they've been rezoned. We hope to get site plan approval by this fall. We need site plan approval of that development before the movie theater can even legally develop. Because one thing I didn't mention was this Park 170 here, not only did the original developer build that not in a good way, right, to entice commercial, the spaces require a lot of tenant improvement dollars as well to make them work. The city also provided them land rights across the downtown. So when we wanted to develop, we had to negotiate with them to relinquish land rights, which is value for them, right? They're giving up rights that they had control over the land across the downtown. The only way they were going to do that is if they saw something for themselves. So they said, okay, we believe in this plan enough that we're going to give control over to you of land that we currently control. But there's multiple steps towards that. One step was already accomplished. We signed an agreement with the VRE for that garage to be built. We got the funding for that garage to be built. They broke ground last week when they started clearing ground over there. That was an important step, right? That released their ability, when we got that agreement done, for the site work at least to begin here. For the building to be legally able to construct, they have to have site plan approval here for this development, because once they get to site plan approval, after a year, the city has legal authority to build that 150 spaces if they don't, and charge it back to them whenever they do build. Okay, so that's what made this owner comfortable with giving up the authority for this land, which they controlled, and they also controlled this land as well. So the other thing with the theater as well is that they cannot start building until the garage is nearly done, right? So the garage is expected to be about a 20-month build, the theater about a 12-month. So they're going to have to keep progress on what's happening with the garage before they can pull the trigger, because you don't want to have an open theater without an open garage with no parking. You don't want to repeat the mistakes of Park 170. So all of this has to be timed, multiple hurdles that we have to overcome, but we're taking every step, the right step at least, to ensure the best chance for the city to be successful. We talked about the best parking for restaurants and retailers is right in front of them. So one thing we did as well to negotiate this deal with the owners of Park 170 so that they can release the land rights in the downtown so we could develop is to analyze what else can be done on Manassas Drive, right? To add more parking capacity on Manassas Drive. Two things came out of this. The first one is called reversed angled parking, which would yield about 12 additional parking spaces right in front of their commercial spaces where they're not going to have the adjacent parking, right? The one that's further up, let me remind you. So down here, they're going to have parking. Up here, they're not going to have adjacent parking yet. So these angled spaces would be over here just to build a little bit more parking capacity. They haven't pulled the trigger on that yet. They have the right under the contract to ask the city to do this by the end of 2024. So sometime by the end of 2024, if they don't do it by then, we don't have to do it, but that was part of the contract negotiations. And what that looks like, reverse angled parking, which is going to take some time for people to figure out. It's done in other parts of the country. It's very rare here. I think it's done in one street in Manassas, but it's a residential district, so it's a little bit easier. It's going to be in a commercial district, but what they're going to do is they're going to narrow the lanes on Manassas Drive to also hopefully slow down traffic coming down that hill as well as pedestrians cross. Create a new lane that will primarily serve as a bike lane, but for people who want to park, they'll be able to pull here, assuming there's no bicycle, of course, pull here to stop, so they don't stop traffic, and then safely pull reverse here. And this was determined to be the only way to do this from a safe standpoint, the safest way to do this from an engineering standpoint. We had a company called Dewberry do this study for us so that cars could pull out without getting hit, right? So they had good visibility before they pulled out, and they had a lane of traffic to go to before pulling back onto Manassas Drive. So that's a reform that may be coming. Another one that we already did was adding 10 parking spaces on the other side of that building A, again, where they're not going to have adjacent parking. So a total of 22 spaces when you count the reverse angled plus this additional 10 on-street parking spaces. So combined, this is kind of what it would look like. On the other side, you have standard parking, 10 new spaces, and then 12 net reverse angled parking spaces as well. This was the parking situation before we entered into the agreement with Park 170. So those were the two parking lots that they controlled, right? So they did have some parking in front of Building A, but it was across Manassas Drive with nothing really to pull people to that area, right? When I was showcasing restaurants, the space, they didn't like that people have to cross that intersection to get to those businesses, right? There wasn't enough activity to really prompt people to do that. We're looking at hopefully doing some crossing infrastructure to enable that, but the most important thing we're doing is bringing the right businesses and also the anchor to really pull people to this area and help facilitate that cross mobility as well. But in total, we had about 350 spaces available in the downtown. Some of this is also for residential, but you can see it was way too far away to support any commercial, right? The parking demand from the existing retail from Park 170 was about 245 spaces. And the way that's determined is that for every 1,000 feet of traditional retail spaces, you need about 5 parking spaces. So the demand was for 245 parking spaces. As a total, you had that, they just weren't properly positioned, right? So what we've done is we better positioned them and added more parking, right? So the numbers would be overwhelming to enable the success of this side of the downtown, to pull people here, and with the proper kind of crossing infrastructure, pull people over there, and now with the adjacent infrastructure, at least satisfy the business requirements of Building B of Park 170. If this doesn't work again, we're going to have to look at options for what we're calling Phase 5 to add those parking spaces up there. Another part of that deal was that Artena, the 7-story apartment, they gave up 22 spaces for Park 170 as part of that parking negotiation as well to help them with resident parking. But in total, again, we had 350 spaces replaced by 547 spaces when you don't count the garage parking. When you count the garage parking, you're talking about 1,287 total spaces, okay, now in the downtown. That's more than what's needed for the commercial component to really ensure that we don't have a lack of parking as an attributing factor for why commercial is not working. Not counting the theater, just like, not counting the garage, we only added a 50-space demand requirement for downtown parking with the commercial that we're building on this side of the city, right? So we built 500, we're gonna have 547 spaces for all the other businesses, not counting the theater, which is going to rely on the garage itself. The demand before was 245, so with the demand that we had is about 300 spaces. So we have an additional almost 240 spaces of parking supply for retailers in the downtown. And this is kind of where the parking will be, the Phase 3 lot, which is actually open right now. Yes?
So are you saying that Manassas Drive, which is now two lanes in each direction, will be one lane in each direction in front of this development?
No. The lane, so what I forgot to mention was, in order to make this happen, if like during the daytime, pay attention to the sidewalks, especially in front of Building A, the building on the right on Park 170, they're very wide. We're going to shorten those sidewalks for the parking spaces and narrow the lanes to add that additional lane for cars to be able to safely do the reverse. So the same amount of lanes now, right, but just narrowed. Yeah. So this is the theater that we're now working with. I'm going to talk about Cinema Cafe in I think it's the next slide for what happened with Cinema Cafe. But BNB Theaters is the new partner that we have with Norton Scott as the developer of Phase 3 to now actually construct this building. We're excited about this theater because they're expected to bring in about 100,000 more visitors at least than what Cinema Cafe was. They are the 4th largest theater chain in the country, but they dominate the Midwest. They're just coming now to the East Coast, but they're the largest mom and pop theater chain as well. They're not publicly traded. Same family has owned them since 1924. All right, they wanted to open here in 2024 to celebrate their 100-year anniversary. Not going to happen now. It's probably going to be more like 2025 because of all the delays. But for over 100 years now, the same family, now it's the great-grandkids who are running the business, right? Which is very exciting. But that means that they have longevity. They know what they're doing. They actually were performing pretty well. They only had a negative 5% drop during COVID in sales compared to other theaters. They survived it. They continued to expand during COVID. They're one of the few that did. The reason why is they have some great products. I see kids here, right? Kids love this stuff. They have what's called screenplay, so that families, can come in, their kids can play for a bit, and then when the movie starts, right, they have like cartoon singing to kind of get kids back into their seats. So they have kind of playtime mixed in with cartoon movies as well. They have date night concepts. They have the largest widescreen projection in the world. They showcased Top Gun to us to show us kind of the potential of it. It was awesome. It's just really going to bring people here. Again, they do bowling. They do arcades. They have a great bar. And if anyone likes old fashions, great drinks, they have that there. So it's just a great ambiance, a great product to really differentiate ourselves, because we can't just have a standard Cinemark or Regal, right? That would be okay. It wouldn't differentiate our town center from the others. So we need to be unique. That was one of the recommendations of Street Sense, a consulting firm, is try to bring unique products to your downtown because of that fact that I told you we're too far away from 66. We have to pull people here, right? So this is just an aerial view of what this could look like when done. This is an older picture. The plaza looks a lot different than what was planned back then, but the point of this is the garage. This is what exists right now, and then this is what the theater would look like. If you notice, this building, the City Hall, was supposed to be 4 levels, and people in the last few town halls asked me, hey, why is it only 3 levels, right? Why not have more City Hall space? And it was supposed to be 4 levels. But when this agreement, the phase 3 development was being approved, unemployment was skyrocketing about 14%. COVID has just taken over. We didn't know what was happening with the economy. So the governing body very intelligently said, hey, let's be a little bit more conservative here, right? Let's scale back what our annual lease payments will be, just in case there's a slowdown in overall growth. Build it only at 3 levels. And then if the theater is built, we'll get our 4th level back then. And why that's so smart is if the theater comes, you know you're going to be successful, right? So you can take on that bigger burden of a fully sized city hall that's actually needed for the space requirements. The other thing to point out here, what we're going to try to do is also get a screen mounted on the theater. Has anyone been to Mosaic here? Right, you've seen the screen right on the theater. We want to do that, but we want to control it so we can control the programming. As a city, we want to hook up gaming systems to it, let kids kind of line up and play Nintendo Switch Mario Kart right on the plaza on a giant screen with surround sound to make it an attraction point and a fun environment for our families. Try to showcase sporting events, right? Major news. Hopefully we land on Mars here in the next 10, 15 years, and that's where we want to kind of showcase that and bring the community together to watch those kinds of experiences as well. So Cinema Cafe, that's who we had to deal with prior to COVID and even during COVID. We had 2 separate deals with them that fell apart, right? The first deal fell apart because of COVID itself, right? Their attendance numbers just collapsed, right? They continued to expand, but then they kind of stopped, right? And then a few blockbusters came out, like Spider-Man, right? And they started doing well again. They said, okay, well, we want to do this again. They signed a follow-up deal, and they backed out of that one because of the second impact of COVID, which was inflation. When we started this whole thing, we estimated that, and they priced it out as well, the theater would cost about $11 million to construct. That number has gone up now to $19, $20 million because of inflation. So when we planned all this residential, right, to subsidize all the commercial, at that time it was enough, right? It was enough for Norton Scott, right? Because Norton Scott sells to Stanley Martin, who builds, right? But they already had their deals done before, right, to sell. So even though housing prices are selling for a lot more, they're not actually making any more to kind of finish subsidizing the rest of commercial. But the pricing of theater construction has skyrocketed tremendously, right? But the other issue is theaters are not doing new builds anymore, right? They don't want to pay, at least they don't want to pay lease rates for a newly constructed building. They want to pay market lease rates for a renovated project, right? An old theater that went out of business that they're going in and renovating, or another box, right, that they can go in and establish their theater there. They want to pay those lease rates, which are much lower than new build lease rates. That's the new market reality. However, we're doing a new build here, and we're doing a new build during massive inflation. And not just that, massive interest rates. So Norton Scott's going to go out and borrow money for this. They're going to pay a lot of interest on this, right? It makes it very hard for them to charge a market-friendly lease rate. So even though a theater wants to come here, it makes it a challenge. And again, I don't present that as an excuse. I present that as another obstacle that we need to overcome. And we're coming back tonight to present kind of how we think what we're gonna do to overcome that challenge as well, what the options are. And again, no options are perfect. Everything in this world has trade-offs, but we're coming back with a solution for how to overcome this challenge. Right now, to get the lease rate to where it would be more market-friendly, right, there's about a $5.5 million delta, right, in construction costs that need to be brought down for them to be able to do this successfully. So Norton Scott, who's the developer of all this here in Phase 3, they need more help, right? They need to be able to build more residential again to subsidize the commercial, okay? And that's the kind of what we came up with. So if they could build more residential, great, and then they can pay for the theaters. However, if someone can build it at a higher value, then you get to that $5.5 million a lot easier, right? And they can give that money then for Norton Scott to utilize for the project funds for the theater. And that's the big thing that we're talking about tonight. So the development. This is Andrew Drive, this is Signal View Drive, this is a 7-Eleven and Preston's Pub. Are you all familiar with this area of the city? Okay. These are the senior apartments here. So what we originally looked at was extending age-restricted housing to this lot that we own as a city to keep consistency with the adjacent parcel, try to keep the same buffer distance on Manassas Drive as well, to come up with that funding, again, that's needed from the additional residential now to overcome the inflation impacts. So we partnered with, so Norton Scott's value was like down here for doing that, and a company called Northfield said we can do it for this amount of value, right? A lot more that could go towards the theater. But they also, when we started talking with them, independently, they started talking with the Christian school, who apparently has been reaching out to people for trying to sell land. Initially, they were going to sell this piece of land that they weren't utilizing, and then it was determined, at least again, this is between them, the city's not involved in this transaction at all, that they actually are going to close down because of enrollment declines, right? And they want to sell the entire property to this developer to let them do more, which is more money for the city. We don't need that, right? All we needed was this, but that's something they're coming back with. It's more money to ensure that this will be successful, right? But if for whatever reason that deal collapses, we can still move forward with a smaller development just on that 3-acre parcel. This is what it looks like in its entirety. These are the age-restricted buildings, and you should have, Sarah confirm, they have the renderings as well from Northfield in the packet. So in the very back of the packet, is that where it is?
They're loosely in
Okay, they look like that. So they look like, yeah. So the age-restricted housing is the bigger building, and then the townhomes, you can see the images for the townhomes as well. But they're looking to do about 128 senior condos. 13 of those will be affordable. Affordability is a ongoing theme that we need to get to. And we're going to have to do a lot more than just this. What we're hearing a lot now is, and what we're seeing is, there's a lot of basement rentals. Have you guys noticed this across the city? Maybe not in the center part of the city, right? We have apartments here, right? And condos, so not a lot happening. But what I'm hearing from residents on the western half of the city and the eastern half, especially when I did those town halls as well, is there's a lot of basement rentals happening right now. Remember when I started this presentation, I said there's a 100,000 unit shortage of supply for housing? People need somewhere to live, right? And they also need affordable places to live. So we have to do more when it comes to housing. Not just this, but also more affordable housing as well, a lot more of it. Because we can't just kick people out and then ask where they're going to go. All right, you'll end up creating homelessness. And people are going to start complaining about homelessness issues as well if that arises. So we have to be smart about this. We alone can't do this, of course, right? The Fairfax counties of the world, the Loudoun counties of the world, Prince William counties of the world. It's really up to them, but at least we can do our part, right? We can at least say we're being responsible. We're not just kicking people out on the street. We're actually trying to come up with housing for them to occupy, and that's why the governing body now is pushing, for, more strongly for more of an affordable housing component to any development. Right now, we're about 5% of housing, but I think we want to try to grow that percentage for any new development to add more affordable concepts. Why you do it kind of from a mixed fashion is because, again, the market rate sales would subsidize the developer's ability to offer more affordable housing. And we're currently looking at what that means from a rental standpoint, but just as a way of example, a family of 4 earning around $71,000 to $90,000, their rent would go down to roughly around $1,300 to $1,700 for a 3-bedroom. If you look at 3-bedroom rentals right now, you're talking about $2,400, $2,500 in the market right now. So that affordability would allow, it's more like workforce housing, right? You have middle-class people who are struggling to pay rent right now, and they're paying more than 40, 50% of their net income on housing right now, and that's not sustainable for the economy. So this project does its part, at least, to help with that demand supply and add some affordability, and also provide some options for age-restricted housing to help our seniors in our community to stay here, to retire here, to enjoy their post-retirement life in Manassas Park and enjoy, hopefully, the new downtown and everything else that we're bringing. So again, the key was to keep the same buffer, have some affordability as well, and the city would net about $5.7 million total from this project in cash. And on an annual basis thereafter, about $1.85 million per year in annual tax revenues. That's equivalent to about a 7-cent reduction in tax rates. That's a significant amount of money, right? You're going to hear some other kind of developments happening in this area with kind of how much money they're projecting to make. Remember this, $1.85 million from this entire development. It's going to bring some good money in, just like these 2/2 Stanley Martin products have as well. It's about 4 times more annually than what we need for a City Hall Annex lease payment, right? All the lease payments that we're doing right now for this building are lease to own. That one would be a pure lease as part of a mixed-use commercial building, because we have full ownership of this building. We're paying lease to own, so we have quasi-ownership right now. After 30 years of making full payments, we'll have full ownership of this building. But again, this development would generate 4 times more than what we need to pay for that lease. And if we decide not to do that lease, again, that's just extra money then to help reduce your tax rates. I'm not going to go to the minutia here, but just note that the way this deal would work again is the city of Northfield would enter into a transaction to sell our land, right, as part of this deal. The funding would go to the Economic Development Authority, which Norton Scott can tap into as a project fund, just like they tapped into a project fund for this full development that we've seen here up into the theater. And they can use that to build the theater. If they don't use it by a certain amount of time, the money just comes back to the city. That's kind of how the minutia works for this. How we would come up with the $5.5 million gap that I talked about, we would take $4.25 million of the $5.7 million that I said the development would generate, and we would take about $1.25 million in ARPA funding. ARPA is a federal pot of money that we received a couple years ago during COVID for many purposes, including dealing with the pandemic, dealing with other issues related to the pandemic, and the big one, economic development, right? Grow back the economy, help struggling industries. And the unique thing about ARPA money is it helps struggling industries with their expansion plans to get them back going. What industry was hard hit during COVID that I talked about tonight? Movie theaters, right? They were really hard hit. So this funding allows us to kind of help them out with their continued growth to get the U.S. economy kind of back on track. And that's the funding that we received. An example of another kind of, like I said at the start, where we have a competitive disadvantage because of our location. We have to be smart with how we leverage our assets, right? I just showed you one way that we're leveraging one asset that we have, a 3-acre lot, to help us get the theater done. It's an investment to generate revenue in the long run, to pay for itself and to generate profits for the city. Another one we did was on Route 28. We own this plot of land from the red line down to here, right next to Central Library and Sheets. Are you guys familiar with that is? We own this parcel of land, and we found a developer who not only would bring a great tax revenue business, Popeye's Chicken, right, with a drive-through to that lot, but who owns also multiple other franchises that can go in Park 170 across the city. So we incentivized, if by selling them this land, the more they lease out space on the other side of the city, the bigger discount they get for the land. That's how we structured this deal. Because again, we have a competitive disadvantage, we had to be clever. But everything we're doing is going to generate revenue that goes back to you all in the form of tax rate reductions. This is just what it would look like with the drive-through right now, tentative plan. That's currently under rezoning and site plan work right now. Yes?
The Popeyes, that's already a thing? It's going to be Popeyes?
Yes, it's going to be Popeyes, yeah. Yeah, they, you don't like Popeyes?
Well, I just feel like there's a lot of like fried chicken things, and the thing that we don't have in this area is like healthy options, and I'm trying to figure out why we don't think that something like Sweet Green or Cava would actually bring up people. Like, I don't want to go all the way to Gainesville to go get my food, but that's what I'm doing all the damn time, or Centerville, because there's nothing healthy here.
Yeah, we want to find healthy options. They're not going to go there, though. I've been talking to businesses. They're just not going to go on 28. They're going to go first on Liberia or Sully before they come here. That's just where they're going to go. That's where the market is. Where they could go is a town center. You know why? Because the 28 is more primed for drive-throughs. When they would come here is if we could redevelop that shopping center up there. We were looking at Starbucks. But Popeyes would generate a lot more money than them. Yeah, there's no fried chicken in our part of the city, just to let you know.
What about the
In our 28.
the thing that you guys just opened, the thing.
That cookout, that's not fried chicken, that's a hamburger place. Yeah.
Well,
There's
greasy.
a pupuseria right by Belmont Station.
What's that?
There's a pupuseria by the 7-Eleven on Belmont Station, which is fried chicken.
It's mainly, it's not the quality of Popeyes in terms of sales. Yeah. This is going to make a lot more money than all those businesses you just talked about. It just will. And again, you could say that an independent business, you can name out your business that you would like, right? But again, we tied this to the leasing of Park 170 as well. So we had to find a franchisee that would do both. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I wasn't saying that you were wrong. I was saying that you were incorrect in stating that there's no fried chicken in that area, because there is.
And 28, that's purely fried chicken.
There's a fried chicken place right by the 7-Eleven in front of Belmont Station on Manassas
In front of Belmont
Drive.
Station. Okay, but that's not on 28, right?
The Megamart Shopping Center has a pop.
Exactly. That one's going to close down. That's the one that's coming to that. Yeah. Yep. Yes.
Can you ask that the folks speak more directly into the microphone?
Sure, we could do that. Yeah. So if you guys want to speak, please raise your hand and we'll take the mics to you. Yes.
Hi. So I'm looking at one of
Thank you very much. So I'm looking at one of the slides and it says 9 businesses in negotiation for leases at Park 170. Could you tell us a little bit about that and maybe if there is an opportunity to perhaps have a kava or something in those spaces or what we think might
There
occupy
absolutely
them?
is an opportunity. Whether they're going to come here, though, again, I don't control what businesses do. I can engage with them, right? I can express what we like here, but if they don't like the market, they're not going to come. I think if it post movie theater, I think they would consider it, but right now they're not. We've been trying to get different types of businesses here that just aren't pulling. I can't discuss who those businesses are that are negotiating except for one. It's called Little Bow Tie, but they're going to call themselves Little Soup. It's going to be a Thai restaurant. That's the only one that signed the lease so far. All the other ones are still in negotiation. So we're going to try to get different mixes, even, gyms, other things as well in there. We'll try to get healthy food options. I've been talking about that as well. This building next to us, we were thinking about subdividing it also for a kava or a mod pizza or, those other ones that kind of go in town centers as well. But right now the negotiations are tough. The market still has a black eye because of the empty storefronts over there. Until the theater comes here, right, we don't have the kind of pool that I would like. Yeah. Yes.
Could you give us an update on the coffee shop and the Mexican place that's supposed to be in this building?
Yeah, the Mexican place is getting their permit for flooring this week, so they hope to start. So they're going to start likely in September, and the coffee shop will as well, probably the end of September. But they'll both open up at the same time because the coffee shop is a lot quicker build because they're not going to have a full commercial kitchen. So the goal is right now to be open by February for both. Okay. Any other questions before I keep going in? No? Okay.
Not all the slides that you have are in this package.
Yes, that's what I mentioned for when I started. Those are just summary slides, but I'll be posting this tonight on the website. Yes.
I know that you said that they're not all in lease contract, but you did say that part of the draw for the Popeyes chicken was that he was opening he or she were opening other franchises. But you can't speak to what the other franchises are that are coming with the Popeyes?
No, it's not. It's part of Park 170, not Popeyes. Does that make sense?
Yes, but
Yeah.
it's owned by. Is it not owned by this? Or the franchise is not owned by the same person? And
They
that's the
are,
draw
yes.
Right. So.
Yeah.
We're,
They're under negotiations right now.
Is
Yeah.
there a place where we can see their portfolio or anything like that to have a better idea of what would be coming to a company of Popeyes?
That's all private information, but as soon as they actually sign the lease, then we can make that announcement. Yeah. All right. So facility needs, when we started talking about the downtown development, we talked about our facility needs right now and how not to burden you all with those facility needs, right? We talked about the city hall, what the estimate was at that time for major renovations of that building, and then Public Works. Public Works is the oldest building in the city from a public facility standpoint. It used to serve as the old police station and fire station. It's way beyond its life cycle. So we estimated for, back at that time at least, very rudimentary estimate, the price has likely gone up, right, because of inflation, about $11 million to address that. So at that time in 2019, we determined a $35 million unfunded capital liabilities, but really between these two, about $23 million. Remember, the theater went from 11 to 19 million. Do the same math here, right? The price of doing all this is gonna go up tremendously. However, there's a way to do this without impacting you all, and these are the numbers for the city hall. Right, when in 2019, I went before everyone, I said, hey, I'm going to get this building done and you guys won't pay for it. And true to our word, we did it. All right, this is the payments that we're going to be making, and here's the revenues generated. Here's our profit by FY30, $7.6 million in city tax revenue profit, right, after paying the lease payments for this building. So it worked. One of the interesting things about this, is just to show you how the market works, is just by rezoning, when they rezoned those industrial parcels and tore down the buildings, we were making more tax money from empty land that was rezoned for mixed-use development than we were from industrial that had businesses there. That's how valuable the housing market is, right, and mixed-use development is from a valuation standpoint. So that's why we were already making money before anything was built here. Everything was being torn down and we were already making money just because of the rezoning and what it did to the assessed values. But so this is the plan again. I want to do something like this for the Public Works building, what's actually called the Community Development Building, right? It houses Public Works, planning, zoning, code enforcement, building inspections. How to deal with that and you guys pay $0 for that. That's our goal always, is to not impact you all, because we know the tax rates are already too high, and our goal is to get the tax rate down. And remember, I started with that math equation. Right? If I want to get your tax rates down further, yet we have these capital costs that need to go up, I need to improve the tax base to pay for that capital liability so your tax rate can continue to go down. And it's not just our community development department. Our schools and our CIP have two major facility requests as well that are going to cost a lot of money. One is for transportation facility for their transportation employees, all the school bus infrastructure, and for their facility people, right? They have a lot of big buildings, and they have facility needs for those the facility infrastructure itself. These are big projects. It would be very expensive to build a brand new facility for both of those. It would cost you all a lot of money to do that. So we wanted to kind of try to tackle all of those in one shot, because these are very similar uses to what exists in public works. So what we've done, and this is, again, has already achieved. So the thing that I showed you before, the development on the 3 acres near the 7-Eleven, that's right now being presented to you all. That hasn't gone yet for purchase and sale agreement, right? You guys will probably see that in the newspaper. There'll be a public hearing. That'll be kind of your time to come back and comment and on what your opinions is of those. This one's already gone to purchase and sale agreement, but it will come back for rezoning as well. But the goal for this one was to acquire an existing industrial building for the community development department and for our schools, and hopefully generate revenues to help our schools with retrofitting their facilities for vocational and technical training classes for the high school students, right? To give them that expanded opportunity for education. There's roughly only about 25% of our nation's high school graduates actually go to college, so we had to think about those other 75% as well. So we want to do something about that here in the city. So we hope to be able to generate revenue, and if it's desired, then utilize that revenue again for retrofitting for the schools for those opportunities. And also do some investments on the west side. If our public works ends up leaving that facility, Kent Village Square is a commercial center over there that's very successful. We want to expand that Kent Village Square into the public works area as well to provide additional shopping opportunities for our residents on the west side. And do that again, same model as we did with the City Hall, generate revenue via adjacent development to pay for the acquisition and the retrofitting. So again, you guys don't pay for it. Fortunately, adjacent to that building, we do own a small piece of land. So not only are we saying, hey, allow for development, but we get to control that development, and we get to get some money out of the development from land sale as well, not just from profit cash that would be coming to us. So about $1 million again for 0.65 acres, and it's not in our downtown. Remember, so we said that in our downtown we were getting around roughly $1.5 million. So you can see we're not selling anything for cheap anymore as a city. This is a developer. They're called D.R. Horton. This is what's going to be, or proposed to be developed there. 108 2-over-2 rental units. We'll get about $1.9 million in profit cash if this holds. And they're also going to do about 5% workforce affordable housing units in this location. The location again, Digital Drive and Manassas Drive intersection. This is what the layout would look like with an emergency exit entrance over here if this road ever gets blocked as well. Here's the money behind this. The cost of the building right now is estimated at $6.1 million. We would generate about $500,000 profit up front from the land sale money, the profit cash, the real estate tax revenue year one, tap fees. You guys know what tap fees are? Whenever there's a new development, right, they're going to have access to our water and sewer system. They have to pay a pretty big fee to access that water and sewer system. And that helps you out because it goes to the fund balance. That helps us achieve our capital goals. And that essentially it's a greater share of other people's money going towards the existing debt and capital infrastructure. So that's less of a burden on the water and sewer system on their rate increases. And then there's existing businesses there that if we acquire this building, the proposal is to let them stay there until their leases are up. So that would actually generate income for the city as well. So about a $500,000 profit up front. And then the long run through annual tax revenues, about $7.6 million available for needed retrofits and facility maintenance for that building, and then hopefully for the schools as well for any retrofit activities that they need at the high school. So that's the kind of the two developments that are proposed, this one for rezoning, the other one for purchase and sale and rezoning. So a lot of the concerns when it comes to new residential development are going to be fiscal impact, schools, and traffic. Traffic, I will say, is the biggest one, right? That's the most legitimate concern for any new residential development, right? Because you're adding new people, new cars to the road, right? That's the one that we really have to work hard to mitigate those impacts on you all. From a residential fiscal impact on the city and schools, there's a different narrative, right? There's usually an assumption that it hurts us. In this case, it doesn't, because the world has changed. The world is constantly evolving. So when we did the fiscal analysis back in 2019, when we started looking at the residential units that were added kind of post-2010, we learned that we were actually generating a fiscal profit out of those residential developments. And there's a reason, right? They're selling at a lot higher value, right? And the impacts from those did not kind of, even though we added more people, right, we didn't have to provide the offsetting number of police officers or other things, right? We were just trying to catch up to pre-2008 levels. So there wasn't an actual negative fiscal impact from those additional developments. And we determined positive financial impacts per unit counts, as you can see here. At that time, when we were looking at it in 2019, over the past 2 years, the tax revenue had grown by $2.5 million from new developments, right, that were done historically, that were just brought online at that time, and the debt service spiked by about $1.5 million. Without those new tax revenues, we wouldn't have been able to pay for that debt, right? So it contributed not only to a net positive fiscal impact, but it helps you with your debt liability because there's more people, you have more economies of scale, more units to pay each, or pay a fixed cost like your debt. And studies show this back in those times, right, that, apartments, condos, those things had positive fiscal impacts. But now the argument is some other housing also has positive fiscal impacts because the school argument is starting to go away. Schools are the most expensive thing. Every time you add a housing unit, when you're looking at fiscal impact analyses, the biggest cost on any municipality is each student added to the school system, right? For the most part. But remember when I told you when we started this presentation, we're heavily subsidized by the state, right? We're dependent on student enrollment for state funding. And what you're seeing here, this comes from our school system. When I briefed everyone in 2019, this was the enrollment. And back then I said, enrollment's going to decline because of reports that were coming out, and you can Google this, that birth rates in the United States are dropping. Please Google this. If you don't believe me, please Google US birth rates. They're declining for a specific reason. Generations are different. Millennials and Gen Z just aren't having as many kids as prior generations. Yet the school infrastructure was built out for prior generations of school populations. So less kids being born now, right, means that in the long run, your school population numbers are going to continue to decline unless you compete for families, right, to come live in your community, right, the people who do have kids. So you can keep kind of a steady level of school population. And unfortunately, what we've seen this year, we finally took the toll of this decline in enrollment, where state funding, historically, since my time here, we were getting about $2.5–3 million per year more in funding from the state, right, in growth. That was helping us cover everything we had to do with teacher pay raises, capital infrastructure for our schools. This year was the first time the city had to cover the school's capital liability, right? About $1.6 million we had to shift to our CIP to cover for the schools because of declining revenue. That's your money now. So as enrollment declines, that's going to be a bigger financial burden on you all. Now, as tax base improves, that also, right, could result in decreased funding, except for the fact that they're looking at it across all Virginia, right? If the other jurisdictions continue to grow as well, then that kind of balances out, right? But if we grow faster, then yes, there would be a decline in state revenue for schools, but the beauty is if our tax base is growing that fast, then we will have the money to cover it ourselves, just like Falls Church does. Does that make sense? So again, in the future, I believe communities will be fighting to recruit families to join their communities and populate their school systems as the numbers continue to roll, unless, again, Gen Z is young enough, they can change this, right? But the trends aren't looking good with birth rates. These developments, all these developments I talked about tonight, would generate around 74 students. We've lost 400, right, over the last few years. So 74 just helps slow down that decline in student loss. And that's based off of prior analyses of how many kids are generated per type of unit, right? So those are older numbers that we're going with from the county for how many that generates. So it could be a lot less than this as well. I talked about traffic. That is the biggest negative. When we're talking about policy trade-offs, right, for development, I've shown you all these positives, right? It's going to help us out financially. We get to reduce your tax rates. It will fund schools, we'll fund roads, we'll fund all these things. Wonderful. What's the biggest negative of all these proposals? Is going to be traffic, right? There's just no getting around that. You're adding more people, you're going to add more cars to the road. However, the biggest factor with traffic is actually external. It's Prince William County growth, right? We're a microcosm in terms of population when you compare to Prince William County and all their developments. And what the numbers show here for VDOT, what we looked at was pre-COVID, because I don't want to use COVID numbers because there's just less cars on the road during COVID, so that would be not a fair analysis. So pre-COVID, over a 10-year period when the city added about 904 residential units, Manassas Drive traffic stayed roughly flat according to VDOT at 16,000, whereas Prince William Parkway added about 10,000 vehicles per day. So if you feel more traffic in your daily commute, it's really coming from growth from the county. And we don't profit anything from county growth. We only profit from our growth. Right? So even though there's going to be a negative towards there, the negative of our development pales in comparison to the negative of development in county because the scale is just so much bigger. So the traffic impact is going to be much worse. So in reality, even if we did nothing, we would still have to be working on traffic issues, right? Even if we didn't add anyone, we would still have to be investing a lot more in traffic to help you all out with your commutes because of what's happening around. And that's what we're doing. The governing body authorized the hiring of a transportation program manager a couple years ago, and that was a very wise decision. It allowed for the city to win around $36 million in grants awarded to date. Right? We haven't received all those funds, but that's what we received award letters for that we're getting for transportation purposes. Okay, the biggest one, of course, is going to be for Route 28 when we took the lead, partnering with Delegate Danica Rome and being the jurisdiction that was applying for funding for Route 28. And I'll show you that in the later slide, what that looks like. We're also spending money on, a lot more money now on transportation enhancements, including on Connor Drive extension, right? One of the biggest critiques of the downtown development and any residential development we're gonna do is Manassas Drive traffic. So our goal is to take cars off of Manassas Drive, and we're extending Connor Drive to Route 28. That gives you an option, right, a different option to get to 28 without just having to rely solely on Manassas Drive. In the far future, we're exploring the options as well, not approved yet, right? Definitely would have to be grant funded to have a Connor Drive extend all the way under the tracks as well to Manassas Drive. So you have that option when you're driving in the morning. If you want to take Connor Drive instead, you don't even have to cross the tracks. And it would go under or over the tracks. So if the rail arms go down, has anyone been stuck behind those rail arms when they went down, right? It's gotten better, I think, over the last few months. We really hit them hard at Norfolk Southern to kind of improve that. Nevertheless, that's always a risk when you're commuting. So we're exploring that option. Nothing approved yet, but it's and it would definitely have to be grant funded, but we really would like to get that Connor Drive extended all the way. But we're taking the first step right now in at least getting Connor Drive to Route 28. So you're gonna be able to access 28 here, hopefully in about a year, just by taking Connor Drive as well. And hopefully that will take some cars off. The estimates are roughly around 2,000 to 4,000 cars that would now potentially be utilizing that to access Route 28 that are currently utilizing Manassas Drive. So that's a help. So again, even if we weren't adding any residential units, we would still have to be doing this because of the external developments that are happening in Prince William County. By doing these developments, it helps us fund these transportation improvements that we'd have to do regardless. This is the total spending that we have planned right now for transportation, but our annual resurfacing budget, right? Who likes the quality of our roads in this room? Right? They're horrible. Right? We're underfunding those dramatically. We've tripled that budget this year, right? Because of growth that we've had over the last few years. We have the money now. This is the first time now we're using city money and not just NVTA money for resurfacing, because now we have the surplus revenue to apply for that purpose to improve the quality of your roads. Route 28, who drives Route 28 in the morning, north? Right, not a fun experience, right? A lot of traffic. This was the number one issue back in 2017 when I was hired. It was, how do we fix Route 28? Besides fixing the downtown, besides fixing the financial position, it was, what do we do with 28? Because that's the biggest complaint that our residents have, and I have it too, because I utilize Route 28 in the morning as well on occasion, and it's a horrible experience, right? So we want to fix that. It's a multi-jurisdictional state, VDOT, everyone is working on this. What Fairfax County is doing is really annoying right now, right? A lot of construction going on, but there's benefits. You already saw the benefits when they got rid of that light on the 66 intersection, right, with 28. That was a huge benefit already. They're widening Route 28 on the Fairfax County side. When that project improves, that should improve travel times dramatically. On that side, the county, their priority effort is called the Godwin Drive Bypass. That's currently under environmental review. What that would do is hopefully pull all these people who live here to use Godwin Drive instead of pulling up on Route 28 to ease the number of cars on Route 28 for your commute. And then Delegate Danica Rome has taken the lead in working with the city and the Route 28 Innovative Intersection projects, which if you'd like more information, please give us your email. Our transportation program manager will email you kind of the portfolio of what that looks like. But essentially the goal of that is to make it a safer travel experience, and it's going to get rid of a lot of left turn lanes or a lot of left turn movement on Route 28 to decrease kind of red light times as well to speed up the traffic on 28. So all those things combined will enhance the traffic experience of 28, decreasing your frustrations, right? Who's driven back home at night and Route 28 is just takes so long that by the time you get to Manassas Drive and you get stuck behind those rails, you're done, right? You're upset, right? At least we're going to try to improve the Route 28 experience. With the rail arms, we have been working with Norfolk Southern. We've been pressuring them on a project. I do believe it's improved the rail arms, but again, there's more that needs to be done with that. But regardless, traffic is the weakest component of all these developments, but we're working hard to overcome them, and we would have to do that even if there was no additional developments. These additional developments help us pay for these traffic enhancements that we're looking to do. When people look at these developments, they say there's not a lot of recreational opportunities provided with these developments, and that's very true, right? But there's a reason for this. There's two, actually. One, these are tight spaces, tight developments. We don't have a lot of leverage, right, to add, and not a lot of space to add these recreational opportunities. Two, we want people to take advantage of the existing assets that we have. The community center was one of those facilities that was financed with debt, right? It was a very expensive project. We want to increase the revenues associated with that. So all these new people that we're bringing in, we want them to utilize the community center. To increase revenues at the community center, decrease your financial liability. The other thing is we want them to use our parks. So we have the most, if you look at this chart here, we have the most park space as a share, as a percentage of land, and also as a percentage of population as well, compared to all these jurisdictions, right? So our name, Manassas Park, is actually pretty apt. We do have a lot of park space. Thankfully, Blooms Park played a huge part in that as well. So we already have a lot of green amenities for our residents. We hope to continue to expand that, to grow that, but that's where we want to direct people to enjoy, and that's, again, one of the critiques I heard was that there's just too tight of developments, not a lot of recreation on those developments. It's a legitimate critique, but again, we have options for people at least that we're taking into consideration. This was a 2019 slide as well. It's a repeat of why we're doing this. These are all the reasons why we're doing this. Of course, our number one priority that we heard from back then and ongoing surveys that we're hearing back, right? The number one issue is tax rate reduction. We also hear a lot about additional funding for schools, roads, right? We hear a lot of that as well, public safety. That's what this is for. But also, we think we love this project here in the downtown. Did anyone attend last Friday night? Here? We had one at least. I enjoyed it as well. Please join us next time. It was a fun event. We had a lot of families come here, a lot of kids utilizing that splash pad, right? What we hope with this downtown is it provides a central gathering place for all of our residents from the west, the east, the center to come together and enjoy improved quality of life in our city, enjoyed entertainment options, dining options, et cetera. So not just the money, but also quality of life for our residents. That's why we're doing this. And it's part of a strategy as well. back in 2017, the governing body did a retreat. We talked about what are we going to do here? How are we going to overcome everything we were facing? Our goal was financial survival at FY23, and we got there, and we did even better than what we were projecting because we did a lot of debt refinancing. And the medium term, we wanted to become financially sustainable so we don't fall back to that position. And the long term, we want to become financially strong. But again, the only way mathematically that works is through the downtown development and other prosperous economic development efforts in the city. That's the only way to achieve financial strength in the long run for the city, right? We're always open to other suggestions, right? Our city is full of very smart residents. I've been very impressed in these town halls. We've heard a lot of good ideas, a lot of great questions throughout the community. We always want to hear from you. What are other ways that we can do this as well? There's going to be probably critiques of plans as well, but what are your solutions, right? How do we overcome these obstacles that we have? What else can we be doing? What can we be doing better as a city with existing services as well? We want to hear from you all, and that's why we do these town halls, and also we do the public meetings governing body. We want to hear from you all. If you please join us more for those meetings. We don't have a lot of residents attending, but we'd love to see you there and hear from you as well. So that's all I have for tonight, but I'm here to take any questions you may have. Yes. Oh, if you can wait for the microphone, please.
Sorry, I need to go first. I have 2 other kids I got to put to bed once I get home. So I have some papers for you, if you don't mind. Thanks. So my name is Aurelian Lauer, and I live on Jessica Drive at 9253. And that's going to be, this new development that you're proposing is going to be right behind my house. And we're at the top of a hill, the highest point in the neighborhood. And what I know from that is that there's a ton of water runoff going down that hill. And so my biggest question for you is, has an environmental impact study been done, or a watershed study?
Yeah.
Because if you look at my map, you can see that this development has the potential to impact the Bull Run watershed.
Yeah, everything we do now from a development standpoint has environmental review and environmental mitigation, right? So it has stormwater treatment within the development. So this development's not going to be any different. When the developer comes forward with their rezoning and site plan, they're going to have to demonstrate to the Department of Environmental Quality of the state that they're going to address all those issues. So they don't get approved until that happens.
So when is that study going to be done, and will it be available for the residents to look at?
Yeah, everything would be public notice once you get to, so all that has to be done with engineering, which is done at site plan, right?
Right.
That goes to the planning commission. So there'll be some information during rezoning, right? But they don't know, they won't have those answers until they get this fully engineered. But no developer's ever going to fully engineer something that they don't have approval for, right, to move forward. Once they get rezoning approved, then they do full engineering. That's when they do site planning. They go through my staff, through the Department of Environmental Quality, and have to go essentially address all those issues, and then the site plan comes back to the Planning Commission for review.
Would you be involving the Army Corps of Engineers, because all this water flows down into the watershed, into the Bull Run River?
Yeah, the Department of Environmental Quality of Virginia would have to tell us that.
Okay, do you have a timeline?
I don't. Again, this isn't even at purchase and sale agreement yet. If we get a purchase and sale agreement, hopefully that's coming back to the governing body by early October. I'm not sure how long those deliberations would take. If that gets approved, rezoning, we can never predict how long rezoning takes because they have to submit their rezoning plans. That gets kicked back a lot, right? There's missing information. So, like, for example, Phase 4 has been under rezoning for about 8 months or more, right, where we've been going back and forth. So I can never predict. Ideally, we like things to move quickly within 4 to 6 months, right? Mm-hmm. But that usually doesn't happen. But I'm hopeful that within a year we'll have the site plan ready for review by the Planning Commission.
Thank you. And then I do have a second question.
Yes.
So on Manassas Drive, in that section, if y'all live there, I'm sure you've dealt with this, we already have teenagers drag racing on it in the late evenings and in the early mornings. The same thing happened in my small town too. So is there a plan to put in a better intersection if this development were to go forward and add 250 new families?
Yeah, so again, there'll have to be a traffic impact analysis where they'd have to mitigate that. In terms of the drag racing, it's something we've looked at as well. That stop sign is there, right, for on Carondelet.
Yeah, and they added the flashing.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
I don't think works, but-
We added the flashing.
They start down at Moose Park.
Correct, because if you notice that's the longest stretch of road, 4-lane road in our city that doesn't have a stop sign. It's something we looked at as a governing body. We can look at it again to see if we need to add another stop sign there, a speed hump. But it's something we did here back then. We did look at that. I don't recall why it was shot down and not put a stop sign there, but it's something we can reevaluate if you would like us to do.
I would like that,
Okay.
yes.
All right. Yep.
I'm one of the West Side residents, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about some of the capital improvement you were referring to for that area.
Yeah, the majority of our water system, sewer system, and flooding infrastructure is all in the west. So you're going to see that soon. We've been talking about it with the governing body with flooding. We have a plan right now, design engineer plan from, or it's actually a study yet. It hasn't been design engineered, but a study from Bowman that we'll be bringing back to the governing body soon. But it's talking about all the improvements that need to happen to reduce flooding risk. Because I don't know if we're getting heavier and heavier rains over the last couple of years that are causing kind of temporary flooding for about 20 minutes on some of the roads, on some of the properties. So that's going to be very expensive. The initial estimates that I got is about a total of $7 million for that would have to be done on the west side to mitigate flood risk, right? So we're going to have to figure out how we pay for that via grants. Our water system and sewer system phase enhancements with improving and replacing pipes all along the west side. You're talking about $10 million at least. That's all on the west side as well. The majority of our worst quality of roads are also on the west side because that's the oldest part of the city. So it makes sense, right? So we haven't forgotten about the west, right? Most of our infrastructure goes towards benefiting original Manassas Park, but it's funded by the developments here in the center. So I always hear from the west side, you're forgetting about us. It's like, well, actually not. From a spending standpoint, we're actually spending more on you all. It's just to come up with the revenue. There's no demand over there for major commercial. Kent Village Square is doing great, right? But it's a smaller neighborhood shopping center. And we're very excited about how well that's performing, but it's not going to be game changing like either Route 28 redevelopment would be or the downtown development would be. So a lot of infrastructure for the west side. A lot of bad roads too on the east though, and we are looking at those as well. Especially right now, we're going to look to tackle, hopefully in the fall, but they're telling us it might get pushed back to the spring. Even Manassas Drive, right when you pass Signal View Drive, very poor quality of road as you get to Carondelet. We need to resurface all of that as well. We're trying to secure a grant to resurface all of Manassas Drive from Signal View Drive all the way out back to the west side as well. So we're looking to tackle all of Manassas Drive. So west and east, we're spending a lot on transportation infrastructure, but from a water and sewer standpoint, stormwater, most of it's on the west, with the exception of culverts. There was one major culvert on Mosby Drive that did collapse that we had to fix. That was on the west side. The Kirby Street culvert's still in better condition, but we know we have to fix that. That's on the west side. But the majority of the culverts are actually here in the center, near the Manassas Drive and the train tracks, Railroad Drive. You have about 4 culverts there that we're currently lining, because they were all built roughly in the 1980s with poor materials that are starting to fail now. All of them are starting to fail, but we're relining those right now, and that's a significant project. We're spending over $3 million to address those so that we don't have any collapses. Yep.
I do want to start off by saying that I like the town center idea. I've liked it since we first saw it. I think it's great. So more of my questions, concerns, and comments are going to do once we, start going into the residential areas that you're talking about. I did have similar concerns to the lady that just left regarding the environmental impacts. Yeah. I did notice that in our comprehensive plan, right, there were statements in there around land usage between the railroad up to Andrew Drive and how that is supposed to be designated for commercial and office space regardless of how long it takes. And then also land that is currently designated as recreational is supposed to stay same for active and passive residential use, which currently right now that plot that you are talking about selling in front of the Christian school is color-coded as recreational. So that's kind of added into my environmental concerns when you look at all of the construction already happening for the city center and then wanting to come in and add all of these additional residential units on top of the watershed. I have concerns there. I also think to understand your numbers around the declining student population within our schools. I've also heard that you're saying we don't have enough students, but we don't have enough teachers. So where's that coming in? Like I've heard that we're having to bus in teachers from other countries to fill the needs. So it's kind of like 1 + 1 isn't equaling 2 there for me. So I do have concerns about growing a residential population as quickly as what you guys are laying out when we currently can't even teach the lower population of students in our schools currently. And then, selfishly, you talked a lot about how adding these residential units are going to allow for more affordable homes. They're going to, equal out more of that supply demand. What's that going to do for my home value? Is it going to also decrease it so that it makes it more affordable? And how, selfishly, I want to know that. I understand tax implications where if it's worth less, then I have to pay less, but I don't necessarily know that I want my home to be worth less. And those were sort of my bigger ones.
Yeah. No, I think those are all wonderful points. I'll start with the schools one, then go with the housing, and then back to the residential. For the schools, you're absolutely right in terms of the teacher shortage. That's a national issue. For teacher shortage, police officer shortage, and firefighter shortage, and even social services employees as well. We're just seeing a decrease in labor pool across many sectors, even the private sector as well, but also in the public sector. One of the issues we have with teachers is the ability for competitive pay as well. So you have a shortage as one issue. I'm not sure how we overcome that shortage and get people interested in teaching again. I can't answer that. The other issue that we do have control over is teacher pay, but for teacher pay, we need the additional money to pay for that. And again, as enrollment declines, we get less state money. If we don't do this development and enrollment declines, then we just don't have any money to deal with it. So we're going to lose more teachers. To your point, though, the numbers declining are not a bad thing from a teacher to student ratio. Ideally, you want to get that down, right? But the better way to do it is enhance revenues to be able to pay for more teachers, to compensate them fairly, right, and competitively across the region. You need the revenues for that. So it's going to take some time to get that point. But that's a very valid concern about teacher shortage. We're dealing with that with police as well. We have 20% vacancies in our police department this year, just because there's a lot of people want to be police officers, and we also pay very low when compared to and it's a race to the bottom, unfortunately. Fairfax County, everyone else is jacking up salaries, state police for their officers. So it's really pulling people away from that. From the residential standpoint, though the areas that we're looking in development, they're only restricted from a legal standpoint in one way, which is via the annexation agreement, which you referenced, that it has to be office or commercial, right? There's no demand for that there. Even the one shopping center that we have there, it's not as robust, right? You have a lot of business turnover there. Thankfully, Preston's has survived, right? But before that, you had kind of constant churn with restaurants there. It's not the strongest of shopping centers. So keeping that in and of itself, maybe it can survive in the long run. Adding more commercial is just not going to work. And we talked earlier as well, office is dead, right? So there's not a lot of other development opportunities along that stretch. And again, what was your third point again? My apologies.
I had the environmental impact with removing of just that green space and the combined emissions with the additional construction in city center, and then what will come in those areas once you clear them.
Yep. Environmental again. There's
my home value too. Sorry.
Home value. There we go. That was it. That was the third point. Yeah. So home value. You're absolutely right. You don't want property values to start declining either, because that presents different economic opportunities. But what you don't want is for them to skyrocket to the point where people can't afford to live, right? You don't want a repeat of, like where I come from, San Francisco Bay Area, where people just got, and Councilmember Moore knows this very well as well, everyone just got priced out of being, working class families just couldn't afford to live there anymore, right? So you don't want declining values, but we have such a shortage that what you want is a slowdown in the growth, and you want to provide more regulated, affordable options that stay affordable, right? That are indexed to income levels as well. That way you're providing those opportunities for working class families without negatively impacting your property values. And in terms of environmental, there's two ways, right? So again, every new development, thank God, Virginia's implemented these rules now, has to comply with in not having any environmental impact in terms of stormwater. It all gets reviewed now by the Department of Environmental Quality. That's one. Number two, you all already have to fund a lot of environmental initiatives right now that we don't have the money for, right? The major stream restoration projects that we're trying to get earmark money from right now, from Congresswoman Wexton, she's a champion right now for us. She's trying to push it through to help us get funded some expensive stormwater projects that we need. That are gonna, if we don't get funded through grants or other purposes, are gonna fall on you, right? But these developments, what they do is they provide us those additional revenues to tackle those additional environmental projects, the flooding projects that we talked about on the west side, right? To mitigate that with climate change, we're seeing a lot more heavy rain that's coming, and we need the money to deal with the flooding implications. $7 million is a lot of money, and we have to figure out a way to pay for those without necessarily impacting you all. So we're going to apply for grants. We've been very successful with grants for the last few years. The governing body brought on a firm that's helped us out. They've achieved over 2,000% profit already in terms of their costs versus the revenues that they've brought in. We're going to continue to aggressively pursue grants, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, a lot of those grants require a 20 to 25% match. So we have to have money as well. I'd rather have the money come from new development versus you guys paying for it. So that's, again, there is no perfect solution here, and I recognize there's a lot of negative components to anything that you do from a development standpoint, but you have to look at pros and cons and just see what's your priority. And if your priority, again, is, at least for us, not to add to the traffic problem, but also not to have the revenues to deal with the existing traffic problems and the future traffic problems in the Prince William County development, concerns about any environmental concerns that you don't believe are going to be remedied, then I get, the opposition. But I hope I've been able to present kind of the positives of this as well, and why we need the money to tackle all these problems as well. Yeah.
I think if I could just close, again, reiterating, I like the city center. I would say, Manassas Park has been rated one of the #1 places to live in Virginia, I think a couple years running. Something I think we're all very proud of and would like to see. I think part of that has to do with our neighborhoods and the communities and the smaller parts of the residential areas. And so that's, again, I just have concerns when we are talking about moving in these much larger multifamily developments right in the middle of what we have currently as our, single-family residential areas.
I echo that. That's why we tried to keep it next to the senior apartments, right, which is a 4-level apartment. We wanted to kind of keep the similar look and feel adjacent to it as well. So, and then you have some townhomes mixed in with it. When you look at adjacent to it, you also have townhomes as well. So we've tried to be consistent with kind of the surrounding area. And also the governing body made clear the 6-acre lot on the other side, if you're familiar with that, where it has the Blooms Crossing sign. They said, you're not touching that, right? No, that's remaining green. That's for the community right there. Do it on this, bring us a proposal for the smaller parcel that's going to have a lesser of an impact on green space and everything else, yet still help us accomplish our objectives. That's the plan right now. And again, we're always open to other suggestions for how to come up with, how to resolve these issues.
I hear you. It's just the larger development on the smaller roads, right, on smaller Carondelet, on the back end of Manassas Drive, where there's drag racing versus up front. So that's it.
Yeah, Any other questions? Yes.
I feel like you probably touched on this, but as far as the empty retail spaces that are there, is the hope to fill those eventually, and will we be able to have any, as residents of Manassas Park, input in some of the decisions behind some of these potential opportunities for commercial resident grocery store? Mm-hmm. Anything that, 'cause I also feel like that's an opportunity where if I didn't have to drive to Prince William County or Fairfax County or even City of Manassas to get my groceries, that tax money could be coming here. Yeah. So I'm just wondering if we'll have any input there, or if we'll continue to see more commercial things that don't really make sense for what the people want.
Yeah, that's a great question. You have two inputs in the process, and the third we don't, right? So the two inputs you have in the process is, one, we have heard in the past that people want a grocer here. So when the governing body hears, hey, people want a grocer here, they tell me, go find a grocer for our residents. So when I engage with developers, when I engage with businesses, I'm trying to do that. The problem with the spaces across the street, not to say that we're done trying to get a grocer. There's an important meeting this Friday, which, cross your fingers, we can do it. But if you go inside those spaces, they have multiple levels. So for a grocer, it's very challenging to make that work. Again, the thought process behind the building of that just drives me crazy, but that's how it was built. So that's what's making it a challenge for a grocer, but we're not done. Even if the grocer doesn't work there, we're gonna try to get it somewhere else in the downtown as well if we can. Number two, you have indirect input in that, because as your dollars go towards grocers and types of grocers, right, then they say, oh, there's a grocer demand in Manassas Park as well, right? Those are kind of the two inputs. The third, we don't have the inputs because those are privately owned. So whatever ends up going in there, the owner of that building is the one who approves it, not us, right? We can do it from a conditional use standpoint. If there's a business there that's not a by right use in our law, that's the impact that the governing body can have. But other than that, if it's already a by right use, if the owner there signs a lease with the business, we don't control that because we don't own that property. We owned this building, so we did control the two businesses that came here. One, we wanted a coffee shop to link with our library, right? We want to keep those doors open. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, it's not here yet, but
Yeah.
I'd like to see it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So so we're not done with the grocers. So, this input tonight, governing body wants to hear that. They want to kind of reaffirm, I believe, what they already know. Yeah.
I think it was something to offset the Popeyes, so if we're gonna put more unhealthy options, we get Mom's Organic Market. Yes. The same.
Stay tuned.
Because the Sprouts can come to the most dead part of Subway
I know.
and be successful. I don't see why something like Mom's Organic Market, which is a smaller market, or even Trader Joe's couldn't come here. And if you can do multi-level grocery stores in Washington, D.C., you can do it here.
I agree with you 100%. And I've been directed to do that. And I've met with all those businesses. You just saw it. Even Amazon Fresh was another one. I've talked to many of those grocers. Every time they ended up going to Sudley, it frustrated me. I was like, dude, you're already oversaturated there with a lot of grocers, and they get upset when they don't do well there, right? And I try to tell them, join us in our town center here. They're just hesitant, I think, until the theater's here. When they see the theater, I think they're going to have greater confidence in terms of the success. Doesn't mean it can't happen before, right? If the space on the other side was a little bit better, it may make it easier. But we're not done. We are going to keep pushing for a grocer. So I think we hear you loud and clear, and we agree with you. It's just it's a challenge right now. But anything there right now is going to struggle until the parking is in place and until the theater opens. So anything that we do and get there, they're all negotiating ramp-up leases as well, right? Where they start low and they pay more as things develop here. But we don't have a say in that, unfortunately, right? We have some input as we deal with the owner there, right? We have some incentives that we can kind of throw their way to kind of help them out, but ultimately that's a private sector transaction.
Oh, I'm sorry. I actually have one more question.
Sure.
Sorry. So I'm actually a homeschooling parent, so I do not enroll my children in Manassas Park City Schools, but I do wonder if one of the opportunities that you all have with being an independent jurisdiction is to offer more programming or opportunities for your homeschooling families. I heard that there are more homeschooling families this year. The week alone that I submitted my thing, I asked her how many she had received, and she said we received 10 this week alone, and there's been more. So that being said, if it's not a county running the school systems, I'm wondering if you guys have thought about opening up like some of your extracurricular activities or your arts and other programs for homeschooling families to be able to, almost be like part-time students and be able to take advantage of some of that, especially even if partial enrollment numbers would even help your need for the state to fund your schools. And that could also help residents that are already here without the residents that are, of course, I understand the offhand of that too is the fact that there's teacher shortages. So I get that, but I'm just thinking, as my kids get older, if I wanted to continue homeschooling then, but I wanted them to, participate in band or something like that, or play, or like theater or music, or a sports team to be involved in their city. Is that something that you guys could think about if you guys are an independently run school district and don't have to comply with county rules?
Yeah, what I can promise you is I can bring it up to the superintendent. The superintendent works for the school board, so they'd have to work with the school board and of course, the governing body. I can have the conversation with the governing body as well. We haven't talked about that, but for homeschoolers, we did meet with some of the homeschooling families here when it came to what their needs were when we were looking at transitioning away from the county library system, right, and building our own library here, providing them the resources that they needed. And then during COVID, we did actually provide them a lot of opportunities for free space at the rec center as well. And when Central Library was down for renovations as well. So we were eager always to work with our homeschooling families as well. So I'll bring it up to the school superintendent, but they would have to talk it over with the school board to see what the implications are of that proposal.
Okay, just thought that might help somewhere with your enrollment numbers if you needed to still prove that you guys qualified for state funding. Maybe there'd be a way to because some of those numbers going down are not just because of millennials not having children, because I'm a millennial and I have children, but I'm not enrolling them in school for many, many reasons. It doesn't matter where I live. If I lived in Fairfax County and was in the jurisdiction to go to one of the quote unquote best schools in the state, I still wouldn't be enrolling them in school. So a lot of those population numbers are going down because the families and the kids are here. We're just not sending our kids to school traditionally. So just, you can still serve our families and still get those numbers and still get that money from the state while being inclusive of homeschoolers, because we're paying the taxes, so we might as well be able to use the services.
Yep. That's above my pay grade. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? I saw a hand over here. No? Thank you so much, sir. Well, thank you all so much again for coming out tonight and taking the time to hear this and provide us your inputs. Please do join us for future governing body meetings. We always want to hear from you all and let us know. Send us an email if you ever come up with recommendations for us or anything else that we need to do to improve. And we do have a new customer service team downstairs as well, so if you ever want to just come in, give them ideas. They will write it down, and they'll, if you can't reach me, they'll bring that up to me or my staff as well. So thanks again so much for coming out tonight. Thank you.